Best laid plans in a trash compactor. Nuisance factor, nuisance factor. Can't get herpes from a tractor. Nuisance factor, nuisance factor. In the way of what you're after. Nuisance factor, nuisance factor, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, hello, Adam Rowe.
Well, hello, Boris and Adam.
How you doing?
Hanging in there. You know, here on the Nuisance Factor, so it's Friday. That's always good.
Always good.
Yes.
Always good. TGIF.
That's right.
So today we kind of planned it out a little bit better than we normally do.
We're going into some deep water today.
Indeed.
Going into deep water.
Yeah. So the thing we want to kind of talk about is our views on DJT.
Yes,
Donald J. Trump, candidate for president in 2024.
Yeah, candidate for president, former Burger King pitchman, professional wrestler. He's a man of many faces. You know,
Indeed.
He's been through many phases.
Indeed. And now the shock of him running for president has worn off. If you recall, in 2016,
Yeah.
it was pretty unbelievable.
Yeah, well, it hasn't gotten any less unbelievable. I have to say, it just keeps getting to like newer and more unbelievable levels. It's just crazy.
Indeed. So I wanted to ask you, we kind of touched on this earlier, and that's how the idea for this topic came about. But yeah, I wanted to kind of get your take on Trump. I know you don't want to necessarily tell me how you're going to vote,
Correct.
which I respect.
Okay.
You know, I think as Americans, we tend to be private about like things like your bank account balance and your voting tendencies.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, and people are touchy about that kind of stuff, especially in the era of DJT. I mean, you know, we've got a political situation going where one half of the political movement of the country basically thinks the other half is, you know, the devil. You know, it's not like we don't agree with them or, you know, we think they're wrong on some points. It's like they're bad. And that goes for both sides of this divide. It's very, it seems dangerous. I don't know.
Let me ask you, one thing I keep wondering about is, did it feel that way to you when George W. Bush and, say, you know, what's his face, the sagging face guy were going at it?
John Kerry?
Yeah, John Hines, yeah. I'm just kidding.
Ouch! Savage!
He was obviously the right choice there, by the way, the droopy face Mr. Hines.
He married well. That shit worked out for him. But anyway, did it seem like that during the Bush? Okay, well, I mean, I was in my 20s during the Bush administration, and I'm in my 40s during this whole Biden-Trump dichotomy situation we've got going. So I had a different perspective. I had a different mind. I had a different set of experiences going in at that time. Also, during that time, the internet really had just been, well, it had been a thing for a while in 2004. That was when Bush ran against Kerry. It had been a thing for a while, but I had only owned a computer that was on the internet for 2 years at that point. So, I mean, I was like a neophyte at that point. So, you know, I was still pretty much locked into mainstream news and Fox News and CNN and the kind of news sources that I sort of scoff at here in 2024. I think a great many people who think like me do. But at that time, that was my main source of news. I remember it being contentious. I remember there being, fierce, positions on both sides. But I don't ever remember a time in this country where the mainstream position of both of the major parties was essentially everybody else in the other party is, evil or wrong or whatever. Put your label on. I've never seen it where it was an ad hominem, literally against the voters of the party you're opposing. I've never seen that. I think that's new.
Where do you think that started? Did it start before Clinton's deplorables comment, or did it start after or with that comment?
I mean, I think it probably started before that comment, but that was the point, I think, where everybody put their cards on the table. I mean, the DNC was like, look, if you guys are voting for him, you're evil. Not that you're wrong, not you're mistaken, not, you're misguided, not you're deplorable. You're subhuman.
Yeah.
So.
And then I guess that evolved into if you're
not
voting.
And don't get me wrong, the people on the other side feel basically the same way about the mainstream Democrat voters. It's very clear. And they come out and say it too. Trump hasn't necessarily come out and said it, but people around him, I think, clearly think that way. And certainly his minions in the media and the various political arenas seem to feel that way.
So this brings me to, I guess, my first question.
Okay.
What would you say the virtues of Trump are?
The virtues of Trump. Woo, deep water.
His
deep water.
virtues.
Hold on, I need a sip of this.
Why, let's do this. Why don't you steel man the argument that Trump is good for this country and that he should be elected come 2024?
Well, so I'm naturally kind of I don't like to label myself, and I really hate the right-left paradigm for politics, but for lack of a better way to describe it, I view myself as a center-right kind of person, you know, especially when it comes to like economic matters. I kind of, you know, I kind of favor business over maybe, you know, the union side. I don't know, you know, I mean, I'm for sound fiscal policy and, you know, conservative approach to finances and stuff like that. So Trump's policies, well, I mean, I'd say the number one positive for the 4 years of Trump to me would be he didn't really seem to have started any wars. He didn't start any wars. He did. There were some limited military campaigns that went on during his presidency, but nothing like the invasion of Syria or the destruction of Libya or the destruction of Iraq or the destruction of Afghanistan or a proxy war in Ukraine. His foreign policy seemed to be more or less anti-war, which is a position that I've always held and I to this day hold. And you know, I'm against war as a general principle. I think it's an awful thing for everyone involved. I think it's a horrible shame on the humanity that we seem to have to always resort to it. So I'm for the politician who is going to keep us out of war. So there's that. So I think Trump, and a lot of people probably are like dumbfounded that I would even say that, but I'm just looking at the record. I'm just going by what I saw. You know, he did, I think, pull the majority of our forces out of Iraq as well during his tenure, which I thought was a smart thing to do and needed to be done. So yeah, that's one positive. The foreign policy. I think his fiscal policy of cutting taxes, it certainly helped me. My taxes were much lower during the Trump years. I'm paying a little more now. I mean, not outrageously more, but definitely more. The China tariff, I thought, excuse me, I'm burping. The China tariff, I thought, was a good choice and needed to be done. I think that we had, through the process by which China became a most favored nation and was brought into the WTO in 1999, I think at that point, a lot of the deal that was written for that was very favorable to China, and it had allowed them to do certain things which I think put U.S. manufacturing at a competitive disadvantage, and I thought the tariff was warranted to try to rebalance that scale. And so, you know, I supported that. Other than that, I like a lot of the things that he talked about doing. I mean, I do think a wall is appropriate on all of our borders, and securing all of our borders is appropriate and legal, by the way, required by law. So, you know, I'm glad that he tried to do that. Trying to think of other positives. I can't think of that's the big ones for me. Okay.
Let me ask you about the social issues, right?
Okay.
Because you know, you mentioned fiscal, like the kind of the fiscal position of reducing taxes on the American taxpayer. Right. You know, those sort of things. Now, he
did nothing to stop the $1 trillion every 6 months deficit. This debt that's going to eventually have to destroy us, or at least reset the dollar somehow.
In fact, it ballooned with him even more, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's continued to do so, and it will continue to do so until there's some kind of nuclear event in our economy, I believe, because nobody has, at this point, it's a joke. The government shutdown, because we've reached the spending limit, has become a total karaoke show and a joke.
It does seem like the Republicans are continuously and have been consistently speaking to that, though.
They talk about it, but they'll every single time they will vote to extend the debt ceiling. I mean, is there any evidence that they won't?
No, there is no evidence, but at least they're speaking to that, whereas the Democrats aren't.
I mean, at least the Democrats are being honest about it. They're going to spend until the dollar blows up. The Republicans should at least have the courage to come out and say, yeah, we're for that too, because that's what they're saying.
Well, the Republicans need, like anybody, they need leadership, right? Democrats need leadership too, and right. It does feel like Trump is one of the few people that can kind of rally at least his party and be a leader.
There's no question he's a strong leader. His people love him, man. We were talking about this weirdest thing in the world, and in my opinion, in the Western world, in Western Europe and the United States. UK, Australia. Well, at least in America, anyway. There's basically two big, I think, political factions that are duking it out for the dominance of the culture going forward in the next, epoch. And that's, you've got the forces of globalization on one side, all these large sort of international capital entities which wield power through various corporations and various governments and various various NGOs. So you got those folks. Then you've got this like sort of global populist movement forming to push back against that, both in Western Europe. We see with the farmers' protests and whatnot going on over there, and of course here with the MAGA movement. And somehow, and this is the most bizarro, like, just absolutely surreal, absurd thing. Somehow Donald J. Trump, pitchman for Whoppers, Donald J. Trump, famous guy for being rich, he's the leader of this populist movement. And it makes no sense, but his people love him. Somehow they just love this man.
There is something, and again, I don't say, I'm not I have a nuanced view of Trump, but I will say that he reeks of Americanism. And I don't say that as a bad thing. For me, that's a positive, definitely. Now, it's got elements, negative elements, like the excess.
The same way used car salesmen and lawyers reek of Americanism?
Yes. Yes, precisely. Yes, exactly. You kind of shudder at the excess of it, but at the same time, you note that there are very few people that are representative of what that is. Yeah. And if you, like me, view it as a net positive, right? Despite the sleaziness, the apparent profiteering, those kinds of things.
The graft, the corruption.
In spite of that, if you consider that capitalism ultimately, while not perfect, does, so long as it's not unbridled and so long as it's controlled appropriately, it is the proper economic system for man. Okay, we can get to that at some point.
I'm not sure I completely agree with that, but I hear you.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I think the only alternative to that is some kind of centralized control over the economy, a la communism, right? And so
or you could
that's the dichotomy.
You could have a balanced mixed economy with strong socially minded regulations, trying to rein in the excesses of pure, naked, Darwinistic capitalism.
And I feel like that's what America represents. America doesn't represent unbridled capitalism. We haven't had that here. What we've had
is a Gilded Age that was pretty close. The late 19th century was not unbridled, but it was darn near.
I do distinguish capitalism, even unbridled capitalism, from cronyism or corrupt capitalism.
Yeah, but cronyism and capitalism are like hamburgers and French fries, man. You don't find one without the other.
Well, yeah, that's true. Because in the centralized, centrally controlled economy, you're not going to be able to get away with things like that.
Well, you're gonna have cronyism. I'm sure they had cronyism in the Soviet Union, did they?
Well. So arguably the whole system was a system of cronyism. But what I'm saying is, ideally the system of communism was set up to eliminate those excesses of capitalism.
Right. That was his raison d'etre according to its early people, right?
Yeah. I'll leave it up to you to tell me whether you think communism works or not.
I don't think it worked out that way.
It certainly didn't work that way for the Russians, right? Which is why now they're trying to emulate American success with a mixed economy. Right. But I'm not a staunch capitalist. Right. Oh, well, I am, because I think capitalism describes the natural state of man. Yeah. But then you have to superimpose reason, and then once you do that, then what you get is something similar to what we have here, and so. Let me ask you this, though. We can talk about the economy. Obviously, people differ on that. I wanted to ask you about social issues and Trump's position on some of the social issues, right? Okay. So obviously, he's catering to this Republican base that tends to be evangelical. They have moral convictions that they feel they don't have to explain to anybody, as you've emphasized in the past.
Well, not all of them.
They don't owe anybody an explanation. They can just believe whatever they want. And that's fine. I agree. You can believe whatever you want. I do have a problem with it when your beliefs start affecting me through politics, right? Do you understand the criticisms of Trump from the other side? The other side does seem to be more concerned with social issues rather than fiscal issues. Right. At least that's the way it seems like, that's the way it seems to me. Yeah. And so they would take real issue with some of the comments he made about immigrants, about Mexicans being rapists. He does use very hyperbolic language, and it's offensive. And it's not just offensive superficially; it's offensive in its core. Because if you are for, a prosperous future for all of mankind, you don't like the idea of excluding people. You might agree to do so on a temporary basis as a practical measure, right? But Trump doesn't really parse those things out. He calls things apparently as he sees them. So if he needs to label Mexicans,
he communicates on like a Tony Soprano kind of level.
Yes.
His approach to like mass communication is very, it's very confrontational. It's very punchy, very hyperbolic, very street. I think, which is really weird because the man's never spent any time on the streets. He's born a billionaire, but he has that. I don't know, that street corner, shyster kind of like way of speaking, and he's never abandoned that. It's really weird, I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but as far as the social, so you're saying the issue of the accusations of racism against Trump, I think they're overblown massively. I mean, I have pressed people that I know and love that are very anti-Trump on this claim that he's this this Hitlerish absolute racist hater that wants to burn everyone to the ground except white people, and I just think that's really pearl clutching hyperbole. I mean, whenever I press people on that, what I usually get is, well, he said all these things about the wall and wanting to enforce our immigration laws, and that's racist. Well, I don't really think. I'm sorry, but I don't feel that it's in any way appropriate for any sovereign nation to not have immigration laws and to not enforce them. I don't see how you can remain a sovereign nation, especially if you're going to be a democratic republic or a democracy where every person in the country theoretically has political power once they get here. I don't see how you can maintain your sovereignty if you just open the border and let people come in carte blanche. I think that it's justified and very much rational and needful for every single country, every sovereign nation on earth to vet the people that are coming into their country and allow the people that they are going to be a benefit to society in and make it as easy as possible for those people to get here no matter where they're coming from. I think that is an important goal. And another important goal is keeping folks that are, criminals or, undesirable for one reason or another, or diseased or, somehow pose a threat or whatever, to keep those folks out. And I don't see what's wrong with that. That seems to be common sense. But that seems to, as far as I can tell, that seems to be the kernel of the accusation that, Trump's a racist white supremacist. I haven't, I don't know. I'm sure somebody, they've got all these other things.
It's not just racism against Mexicans that's alleged. It's also sexism because, he was caught on secret, I guess, video or whatever.
So he's talking to somebody in a private conversation that gets recorded, and he says, you can grab them by the pussy.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had private conversations with you where I've said much worse, and I don't think you think I'm a misogynist.
No, that's true.
know?
No, I mean, but that's a legitimate response.
I've said much worse,
yeah.
As have a lot of other people. Pretty much every man you know.
But every time you've said something much worse, it was clearly tongue in cheek and as a joke.
You don't think he was tongue in cheek there?
It's not clear from the audio.
Okay, well, It sounds pretty tongue in cheek to me, man. I mean, it's debatable. I wasn't there, so I don't know if he was smiling or winking or what.
There was no meta discussion. The discussion was about grabbing pussies, and he suggested that he does this as well.
He said he was talking to the other guy, and he said something along the line, you're a rich guy. You're smart. You could just like me. You could just go up and grab him in the pussy. I mean, that sounds like locker room talk. I mean, that sounds jokey to me, humorous to me, ironic to me.
Okay.
But I don't know. I wasn't there. Maybe he's serious, but I don't think he really goes around and grabs women in their vaginal area.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
I guess
would you
Gene
put it
Carroll
past
apparently
him?
thinks he does. But
would you put it past him? A guy like that?
Look, I would never put anything past any man, because when it comes to the opposite sex and the things that your hormones will make you do when you're stupid or will cause you to want to do when you're stupid, I wouldn't put anything past anybody. But I seriously, I just don't take that as a very serious criticism of Trump or an indictment of any kind.
All right. So, for me, my history with Trump is, I've held the view that he was a bad human since the third season of Apprentice. I think I told you about this. Okay. And during the third season of The Apprentice, there was a guy named Bryce. I forget his last name, but the guy was the project manager. And when they went into he ended up losing. Now, he didn't lose because he screwed up in any way. In fact, everybody agreed that the loss was not due to him, and that he performed extremely well, and that if it was only his performance that provided the criteria for the judgment, that they would have won.
Okay.
But if you recall the format of The Apprentice, basically the team leader gets to select two other people to bring into the boardroom with him to be grilled. Okay. And but he can also choose to exclude himself from consideration.
Okay.
And so Bryce was like, no, I'm going to go ahead and own this. As the leader, I'm going to say this is my fault, and I'm going to put myself on the chopping block along with, I believe it was the two individuals that failed. It may have been one. I forget exactly how the format was structured. So Bryce went into the boardroom, and he was like, look, I was the project manager. I feel that, strong responsibility for that. And so that's why I'm here. And these are the one other member of my team that really messed up. And so they should also be on the chopping block. Trump ended up firing Bryce. And the reason he fired him, his explanation was, if you didn't do anything wrong, why would you put yourself on the chopping block? Right. You are being defeatist. I don't need a leader who's willing to put himself on the chopping block for his troops. I want a leader who's willing to throw his troops under the bus, essentially, right? Okay. Essentially, that is the line. So for me, as somebody who thinks that it is virtuous to take responsibility and that it is important for each man, for his character, to take responsibility wherever he can, even if he's not directly responsible for something. I feel like that's a virtue. That's a point of virtue. And here Trump discarded this gentleman, Bryce, who seemed to exhibit that virtue in abundance. That made me really doubt Trump's judgment. So as a result, I kind of wrote him off. Right. I wrote him off as certainly at that point, he wasn't going to be president. That never factored in, but I wrote him off as a bad person.
For that?
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
A bad person?
Look, frankly, it doesn't take much with me, right?
Clearly.
Because when you violate a moral principle, when you don't see virtue that's right in front of you, that's presented to you as virtue, because that's the way Bryce did it.
You couldn't just say, well, maybe he just made a mistake. He's a bad person forever?
He's a public figure. I don't have the luxury of spending hours upon hours with this person. I have to make a split-second decision about whether this person is worthwhile or not. And based on that decision and based on his analysis and the way that Bryce handled himself, You're going
to judge his entire personality by one decision he made in one day, in one moment of his life?
Yeah, so remember, I'm of the view that you are able to make decisions based on the evidence that is currently in. You don't have to speculate as to what else may exist. Now, again, if I had access to more information about the guy, like if I knew him in my day-to-day and I could talk to him further, then of course that wouldn't be enough for me to write him off. But because he's a public figure and all I see is the bluster and the complete disregard, and the clarity of Bryce's position, because Bryce explained it. He explained exactly what he was doing and why he was doing it. And after considering that, Trump doubled down. To me, it felt like Trump had no regard for human virtue. He didn't appreciate the taking of responsibility. What he appreciated was somebody underhandedly seeking the advantage. Okay?
I mean, if it's part of the rules of the game and you're allowed under the rules to seek that advantage, then how is that underhanded? Am I underhanded in baseball if I throw a curveball?
No.
Okay, well, I mean, if the rules of the game are I can put myself on the chopping block or the other two, and I choose to put the other two on, how is that underhanded? I mean, you said underhanded as if that's like some kind of,
Sure. Well, it's underhanded because
it's in the game, right? It's
okay. Maybe that was. I'll admit that maybe that was the wrong term to use. I don't know, or the wrong phrasing.
Well, we are about endless.
But my point is,
infinity,
I think that's very important, though. You say that like it's a joke, but I think that nitpicking things to infinity is the way to go.
Well, that's what our theme of it's on the website, right?
Is that the
Yeah, you put it's like nuisance factor, and then it says like endless nitpicking to infinity or something like that.
Oh yeah.
That's where I was trying to reference that.
Well, man. and it absolutely is, right? Okay. The whole point of nuisance factor is that once in a while you get confronted with this detail that doesn't really fit with your narrative, right? My narrative in this instance is Trump has some character flaws based on his dismissal of Bryce under the circumstances.
Wait, now we've gone from he's a bad person to has some character flaws. Are you backing off your point, sir?
Yeah, I guess so. I suppose my initial point was hyperbolic, but I did legitimately conclude that he was a bad person. So do I feel that way now? No, I don't. Okay. And now I have more information and evidence. Do I still think he may be a bad person? Yes.
Okay.
He may be a bad person.
He absolutely may very well be a bad
But
person.
at the very beginning, just so you understand sort of where my mindset regarding Trump came from, it came from that third season of The Apprentice when he dismissed Bryce,
Right.
and
I got you.
he never recovered with me.
Okay.
And then the next thing, just like the rest of the country, I was taken aback by the fact that he became a feasible candidate for president.
Somehow.
Now, during that Republican primary, I supported Rand Paul.
Right.
I generally support Rand Paul. I think, and this may get
As
me
do
some
I.
heat, don't care. Rand Paul is absolutely one of the best senators we have.
I agree.
He's principled. He wants to manage the government in a way that the American people retain some control over it. I don't know what else you could want, frankly, in a senator. Okay, but was he feasible?
No.
Okay, probably not. I still continue to support him.
The reason that he's attractive to yourself and to me is because of his positions, but those very positions are what make him absolutely unfeasible as a national candidate, because he's not a billionaire able to fund his own campaign, and nobody's going to fund that campaign because it's not in their fiscal interest of the big funders to do so. You know, so
Yeah,
he'll never be feasible.
Well, yeah, and I guess if he becomes feasible, that's grounds for us to be a little suspicious of why he's suddenly becoming feasible.
If he becomes feasible, it's because he's adjusted his position to tailor to the folks that have the money to fund campaigns, which means he's no longer the candidate that would be attractive to me.
And we can say that I think about just about every politician.
Oh,
we
absolutely,
can say that.
Absolutely.
And with Trump, though, he seems to break the mold, doesn't he?
I mean, he certainly, there's this, his political machine definitely has this narrative out there that, Trump can't be bought because he's already rich. Like, he's already rich, and so the money game isn't really going to affect him, and he's going to be able to move without the money. I think there is some truth to that, but I think it's overplayed by the MAGA side for sure. I think there's still big money on the Republican side, big, conflicts of interest, big situations where what Trump may think is right and what Trump may think is best for Trump are going to come into conflict. But that's every politician, not just Trump. What I'm saying that to say that narrative that's put out by the Trump side that he can't be bought because he's already so rich. I don't know if I really buy into that all that much.
Yeah. Well, but he is distinct and different from other politicians in that way. He does have his own means.
Certainly.
And so, I mean, that argument is not entirely without merit.
I
right?
agree. I mean, do I think there's something to it? Yes. Do I think that that's really what's going on here? No, not at all.
Okay. So I do want to get it. What do you think is, maybe I should just ask you, what do you think is really going on here with Trump?
What do I think is really going on? I really think he's kind of just backed himself into a corner at this point. Like, he has got no choice but to go forward at this point. They look at what they've done to him. I mean, they look at his presidency. They impeach him twice. They did all this media hoopla with these various scandals and all this stuff. And it seems like most of the allegations that were brought up over the years, whether it was the Russia thing or a lot of other things, they always seem to fall apart. They craft these narratives that are just shocking, and then somehow a few months later, they just always seem to just fall apart into nothing. I don't know why they can't do that. But what's really going on to me is like Trump has changed the entire direction of the Republican Party against the wishes of the power players in the Republican Party. So it's bizarre. But I think that when you come into Moneyland, when you come into the big money, I think those folks are still very powerful, and I think some of those are still necessary for even a candidate like Trump to have any chance to succeed. He's going to have the backing of some large, moneyed, powerful, influential sort of power nodes within the country and within the world. And so he's got to have somebody behind him. He's not that much of a billionaire. Even if he had Elon Musk money, he would still have to have somebody, and I don't mean voters. I'm talking about some money buddy behind him. Several.
Okay. So you don't feel like he's as independent as his campaign would have us believe?
Correct. I do not.
All right. That's fair. So let me just to go back a little bit, because a lot of the things that you raise here are interesting. I think we need to definitely I think we need to discuss those a little bit, because. Okay, but let me before we do that, let me give you a little bit of my perspective, a little bit more about my perspective on Trump. So in 2016, I vote for Gary Johnson. Again, support Rand Paul in the primary, and then vote for Gary Johnson for the election, because I find neither Clinton, with all her war talk, nor Trump palatable.
Right.
Even though Trump already is confronting her in the debates on foreign policy.
Right.
But Trump is just so difficult for me to palate because of the things that he says that I perceive to be racist. No doubt I did.
He comes off as utterly obnoxious to a good, well-mannered Southerner like myself. He just comes off as just the everything that Southerners sort of, gawk at Yankees about. Every single thing. It's like living up to a stereotype. You know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. With all due respect to my northern friends, whom I love, but understand I'm a Southerner, and that's just the way it is.
I feel the same way, though. I feel like they have, they don't have this sense of Southern hospitality. These things that
he's just obnoxious.
We have ingrained in us. Like you don't offend people needlessly. You extend an olive branch where you can.
You don't pick fights when you don't have to pick fights. You know what I mean? That's the thing with Trump. All these he makes so many stupid, unforced errors. He shoots himself in the foot constantly. He's got a criminal case against him for. Supposedly he illegally took these documents when he left the White House or anything. But he goes, it's a criminal case now, right? You have the right to remain silent in a criminal case. He just gave an interview yesterday to like a reporter on, a mainstream reporter. And he's like, yeah, I took the documents and I packed them up. And so what? Yeah, so what? What? I took the documents, so what? I sent a few boys over there. I take care of it. It was just like, what are you doing, man? Unforced errors, man. So many.
But that endears him so much. And I can say I'm going to, right now, unless Robert Kennedy somehow, I don't know, something happens there,
right.
Which may make me reconsider. Right now, I feel like Trump is the way to go. If you believe in America, and if you are not a communist,
right.
And if you think that the woke movement is positive to an extent, but is misguided in, generally in how aggressive it is,
right.
I just don't know of a better candidate right now that's available to Americans, because
the problem is the DNC needs to give us a better candidate. What they're putting on the table is just like. Extremely, pro-capital, pro-globalist, pro-war. I think personally somewhat radical social ideology, and I just don't think it's particularly popular with anybody, man.
So let me ask you, what would it take, right? I don't, again, not to assume anything about how you're going to vote, okay? But assuming that you see some of the virtues of Trump as I do. Right now I'm set to vote for Trump. I want to save America, and even though I worry very much about Trump and I worry about him becoming a dictator, I've expressed that to you before. You kind of scoffed at that.
I do.
We can get into it a little bit, but I do feel like he shares some characteristics with like Napoleon III in the way that he's courting democracy.
You're giving him way too much credit, man. Sorry.
We have so many historical examples, though, of people currying favor just in this way, and then once they get the ball, they run with it, and not in the direction that democratic society wants them to run with.
He already had the ball, and he didn't run that direction with it.
But that was,
and now he's like 80-something years old.
That may be owing to our system, because thank God we have a system where you're only elected for 4 years, and then you have to be reelected. And so you're not going to do anything to move and shake things up until the second term.
It just seems like
he's about to be in the second term.
Okay, but if my goal is, if I'm 70, whatever, 5-year-old Donald Trump running for, I don't know how old he was in 16, but if I'm Donald Trump running in 16 and my goal is to become the dictator, am I going to try to become the dictator in my 70s, or am I going to try to become the dictator in my 80s? I mean, I think that's. I think you got to go with your. I mean, if you're going to try to become the dictator, you want to do it while you're still young enough to actually dictate for a while, right?
I mean, I think you have to work with the system that you have, and
But the system hadn't really changed.
But historically, right? When do presidents rock the boat? They don't rock the boat during their first term. They rock the boat during their second term. This has been traditionally the case. Why? Because they don't have to worry about re-election. And Trump, if nothing
else,
else,
wait. But if he's going to be a dictator in his first term, and his goal was to be a dictator, once he becomes a dictator, he doesn't have to worry about re-election.
Oh, well, here's the thing. I don't know that it's his goal to become a dictator. I don't think so.
Okay.
In that, maybe he's different from Napoleon III.
But remember, Napoleon
force him to do it. Well, remember, Napoleon III misled the French people initially because he was going to participate in elections. The people were like, "What? We don't want a dictator." So he withdrew. He left France. He went to England, and he waited out an entire election cycle. Then he came back. And when he came back, even people like Alexander Dumas were like, yeah, this guy's legit. He's respecting the democratic principles of our institutions. He backed off the first time. Here he's trying to do it legitimately. These were all the things that were used to and really on paper, you read about the facts and evidence at the time, like Napoleon III was the right choice for the French people. They wanted to end the corruption. They wanted to end the stagnation. They wanted somebody with dynamism and energy.
France at the time when Napoleon III already had a history of having dictators. I mean, Napoleon had already been dictator for
But that's
10 years.
precisely why they were particularly...
But we don't have any tradition like that here in America.
That is correct, but they were. But remember, France also fought a really bloody revolution to establish the republic. So they had all of this apprehension about
then,
another
6
king.
6 years later, they abolished the republic and appointed a dictator.
They did.
That's correct.
But what I'm saying is they had a complex history. So the emotions of the people would have been.
And let me point out, before the French Revolution, for at least 150 years, they were under essentially a dictator monarchy, the Bourbons, who were absolutely dictatorial in their powers.
Right, but that's what I'm saying.
So the people of France really had a 500-year history with a small, maybe 7, 8, 9-year window of a republic. For the rest of that 500 years, they were under dictatorship. There's a tradition of dictatorship in France, which doesn't exist here in America. How is Trump going to become dictator under the American context?
So I love that argument, but I hate what it's doing to lull me into a sense of complacency about Trump, because yes, you're right. I think the historical context, and I mean, I hope that our Constitution, which I value very much, is the world's oldest pro-individual Constitution. It's very important. We are the trustees of it, and we need to safeguard it. And that's the history of America, and that history of America is what gives me hope for America going forward. Because whatever shit we do and whatever trouble, whatever shenanigans our individual presidents cause, America can stabilize itself through the democratic process, and hopefully, because in the historic consciousness of the American people, we are not capable of subjecting ourselves to a dictator.
Right.
Hopefully that's just an impossibility here. I hope so. I have a hope. I don't have faith, though. Faith is your prerogative. That's your area. I don't understand it. I don't get it. So I'm still apprehensive, naturally, a little bit. And Trump does share a lot of the characteristics that I've described, right?
Sure.
He is power itself in a way. And anybody who's powerful like that, right, deserves to be treated with a degree of apprehension, especially in a democratic society.
I have a great deal of apprehension for him and anyone else that holds power. I mean, I think I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
I am not a supporter of Trump. I can go down a list of problems that I have with Trump. But back to your point, I mean, this idea, we're hearing a lot in the news about our democracy, right? Trump is a threat to our democracy. Somehow, if the American people elect Donald Trump in a democratic process, that's going to destroy democracy, according to these people.
Well, that's anti-democratic, right?
It's the most absurd. It's like it's very similar to the argument that we heard a lot in the lead up to the invasion of Iraq, that we were going to invade Iraq to bring them democracy. You cannot point a gun at people and give them democracy. That's exactly the opposite of democracy.
Well, Woodrow Wilson would disagree with you, right?
Right,
yeah, we got to spread democracy everywhere through death and destruction and napalm.
It was a war to save democracy, right? Wasn't that what it was? Wasn't that a slogan? It was something like that. It was a war to save
He
democracy.
was the one who articulated. Well, no. So I don't know if he was talking about.
It was make the world safe for democracy. That was the slogan. That was Woodrow Wilson's
Was that
slogan.
Woodrow Wilson's slogan?
That was his rationalization for bringing the United States into World War I. Yes, make
Genius.
the world safe for democracy.
Genius.
And that makes about as much sense as the terrorists hate our freedom, or Putin is Hitler, or any of these things we hear all the time. Yeah, I want to know. Our democracy. I'm reading in the New York Times. I'm reading in the Washington Post. I'm reading in the Jacksonville Times Union. I'm seeing all these arguments about our democracy and how our democracy is threatened by the outcome of this election. It's our democracy. I want to know, who the hell is our, right? Because somebody's democracy is being forwarded if somebody's elected, right? So, like, what does our mean in this context?
Yeah,
what is this our
that's
democracy
a really good
thing,
question.
man? I mean, whose democracy is it? I think what they really mean is the democratic institutions, in other words, the powers that be that have been established in this democracy are threatened by this vote. And in that sense, yeah, they are threatened by a vote for Trump. They are threatened by any populist movement. They'll fight any populist movement. Trump just happens to be at the head of the latest one. So,
yeah. So I agree with that, and it's shocking when you hear this kind of rhetoric. And I don't think the anti-Trump people are self-aware enough to check themselves, because they're doing a lot of the things that the pro-Trump people are doing and saying, right? Yeah. But they have no self-awareness about it, and it's problematic. I will say this.
Well, we've educated at least one, probably two generations of Americans to reject critical thinking. I think overtly for the most part. And that's what you get. And there's a reason why we've educated him that way, because it makes it a lot easier for you just to say things like that. He's subverting our democracy if he gets elected. And nobody actually sits down and says, now, wait a minute. If he's elected and that's democratic, then how does that subvert? I mean, cultural suicide is a phrase that I've used to describe a good bit of what's been going on with U.S. policy over the last few, 4, 5, 7 years. Indeed. For sure. I mean, and that's just not directed at the Biden administration and its series of incredibly absurd exploits. That's also directed to the Trump administration and even to the Obama administration before that, and even to the Bush administration before that. We seem to be, since the end of the Cold War, on a path that is guided by hubris towards some kind of cultural suicide. That's what it looks like to me.
And that's the most tragic thing. I cannot imagine anything worse for the world than America committing cultural suicide. And essentially, because, you think about it. If America ends now, after 300 years, we are nothing in terms of world history. We are a blip. We are less than a blip. I like Vivek's vision where he says, look, we've only been around for 300 years. If you look at the Roman Empire, in the first 300 years, it had a number of upheavals, a number of crazy developments, right, that could have led to its end, but it ended up persisting for thousands of years. So,
well, the Republic only lasted about 700 years.
For over 1,000 years.
And then the dictatorship went on for another about 800.
Fair enough.
1,300 if you count the Byzantine Empire, which I don't.
Listen, you come at me with these facts, okay?
God, why should rational facts be important to Boris Karlstad?
I do value fact,
and reason.
But I'll say that it doesn't matter. 750 years is still significantly longer than 300 years. Yeah. I like Vivek's perspective on.
I love Vivek, by the way.
It's been a short. I'm still a little on the fence about him, but
I just love how smart he is, man. He seems like this, like I said, like I could just listen to him. It's like I've never seen a man go on TV and speak in not complete sentences, complete paragraphs with no ums or ahs, never taking a pause to catch his thought. It's like listening to a book on tape when I hear him. This man, whether you like him or not, whether you agree with him or not, God damn, he's obviously really smart.
Indeed.
Like ridiculously smart. But anyway.
Totally with you there. We'll see. All right. Well, I think on that note, to be continued, Adam Rowe.
To be continued. All right. I am the Cypher Divine.
Peace out.
In the way of what you're after, nuisance factor, yeah.